South Africa will fall to radical Islam and other migrants if this happens. So with the ANC hell-bent on gravitating towards the global south and radical Islamists such as the Islamic regime in Iran, South Africa is in a very dangerous space, both in terms of economics and national security. We've already seen how illegal immigration has been rife in South Africa, especially due to the porous northern border. We also know how very recently there has been an influx of illegal immigrants from outside of Africa as well. For a long time, there have been many Pakistani and Bangladeshi illegal immigrants, as well as those from North Africa, such as Morocco and Algeria. We also saw how a flight of mysterious Palestinian asylum seekers arrived in South Africa with no prior knowledge on behalf of the Department of Home Affairs. And unfortunately, there is a psychological aspect which is to blame for this conundrum. And if South Africa, specifically its political parties, do not change their attitude, the country will almost certainly fall. But before I get into this video any further, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's entirely free and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below the video. For additional perks, consider becoming a Power Club member by clicking on the join button below the video. Now let's get into it. So the issue that I'm talking about is a psychological one. And in reality, it's actually a very easy issue to overcome if it is actually acknowledged and addressed. The problem, however, is getting South Africa's leaders to finally admit it. So in this article, back from 2016, quite a shocking thing happened in Norway that is actually quite relevant to South Africa today. So getting into the situation, a male politician in Norway has opened up about his sexual assault, let's say, I don't want to say the R word in case the video gets flagged, by a Somali man, stating that he felt guilt and responsibility for the perpetrator being deported after time in prison. Turning to alcohol and marijuana, the lawmaker became numb for years. Carsten Nordahl Haken, I hope I'm saying that correctly, a leftist politician, shared his story in a letter to Swedish broadcaster NRK as part of a documentary series titled I Against Me. So Haken speaks of being brutally assaulted by a Somali man and recalls riding in an ambulance to a reception center at an Oslo hospital. He mentions having samples taken from nurses, speaking to a psychologist, and eventually being collected by his father. So if we fast forward, we see that 6 months later, the politician received a phone call from police, letting him know that a man who had been arrested for having a knife in a public place had also been linked to the incident. The man was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Near the completion of a prison sentence, Haken received yet another phone call from authorities informing him that the man would be deported straight back to Somalia upon the end of his term. At that moment, Haken recalls having an emotional response. The tears, they came. I felt a relief and joy that he was going away forever, he said. However, Haken also recalled having feelings of guilt and responsibility upon hearing the news. It was I who was the reason why he should not be left in Norway, but rather be late for a very uncertain future in Somalia. He had already served his sentence in prison. Should he now be punished again, and this time much harder, he pondered. He went on to say that I do not feel anger towards the perpetrator, for I see him as a product of an unjust world, a product of an upbringing marked by war and deprivation. And this is an incredibly problematic thing, because this attitude of the victim in this situation is an attitude that is being expressed by the West in general, particularly when it comes to illegal migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and the like. And that is one of relentless sympathy. So the reason why I say this is because it appears that the West, whether it's due to a white guilt or due to the guilt of knowing that they feel that they've enjoyed privileged lives, whereas these people have been underprivileged, it appears that the West is in this perpetual cycle of looking for forgiveness from these people, whereby they want to put them on a pedestal, they want to give them a better life. And I understand wanting to give people a better life, there's nothing wrong with that, but they'll do it at the expense of themselves and their own people. And here you have a situation where this man was sodomized by a Somali migrant. And yet, even after such a brutal act being perpetrated, he still feels sympathy for his abuser, wanting to actually prevent him from being deported. Of course, those who are on the other side, particularly people of a radical Islamist background, are unapologetic with their views. They have explained quite plainly that they are waging jihad, that they are in a war against the enemy, particularly the West, and that they are on a global conquest to bring people to the light and accept Allah into their lives. And unfortunately, due to recent actions in South Africa by the GNU, there's a risk of this happening in South Africa as well. So in November, a flight of Palestinian refugees arrived in South Africa. And of course, the Department of Home Affairs was at the forefront of this debacle because, after all, the department led by the DA's Leon Schreiber is responsible for border security. And they actually provided a press release on the matter. Now, what makes this such a controversial issue is that these so-called asylum seekers arrived. Nobody knew of their background. Nobody knew of their history, whether they had a criminal history, whether they were linked to terror groups. And after being held on a plane for hours, they were eventually allowed to disembark, and Home Affairs, rather the Border Management Authority, let them into the country. And then Cyril Ramaphosa very famously, or rather infamously, said that he acknowledged that these people arrived mysteriously and we do not know where they come from or what their backgrounds are, and that an investigation would take place. However, it's too late to launch an investigation when the people are already in the country. But moving on to the press release, Schreiber explained that after receiving reports from relevant officials, Schreiber can provide the public with the following update on the facts surrounding the processing of travelers from Palestine at OR Tambo International Airport. So it explains here that the chartered flights arrived in Johannesburg from Nairobi, Kenya, and upon arrival, the 153 passengers on board were facilitated through the relevant immigration processes by members of the Border Management Authority. So during the process, BMA officials noticed the absence of departure stamps in some of their passports, which is obvious because if they came from an Israeli airport, Israel doesn't issue departure stamps. They issue small cards which prove that you exited the country, as well as the fact that a number of travelers did not appear to have returned tickets or addresses for their accommodation in South Africa. Importantly, as with many other countries, holders of ordinary Palestinian passports enjoy 90-day visa-exempt access to South Africa, subject to security and verification procedures, including to protect travelers. So as a result of the discrepancies, the BMA could not allow them entry right away as further verifications had to be undertaken. Vulnerable members of the traveling company were disembarked onto air-conditioned buses. The government of South Africa subsequently interacted with the Palestinian embassy and other role players. It was established that the absence of stamps, return tickets, and accommodation addresses did not indicate that the travelers wished to apply for asylum. That's a peculiar statement to make because, yes, it doesn't indicate that they want to apply for asylum, but it also does not indicate this. I honestly don't see how the two are related. People who are fleeing from a dangerous situation aren't going to have all of this stuff arranged beforehand. So this is a very peculiar point. As a result, it was confirmed that they would be provided with accommodation and care during their visit, and the Minister of Home Affairs presented the new fact set to the BMA Commissioner for consideration, including on humanitarian grounds. So again, you don't know who these people are. You haven't done a background check, but no, now you're going to give them accommodation and care, and this is somehow all right. Once satisfied that the absence of certain elements from their itinerary would not leave them destitute in South Africa in the absence of any asylum claims, the travelers were granted entry into South Africa on the standard 90-day visa exemption, subject to compliance with the standard conditions. By the time that entry was granted, 23 members of the group had already taken onward flights to other destinations. All of the travelers are in possession of valid passports, and at present, none of them have applied for asylum. But I do want to obviously emphasize that they say at this time, but of course, this could happen in the future. The Department of Home Affairs has further taken note of a statement issued on social media this morning by the Palestinian embassy, indicating that the travel of these 153 Palestinians was arranged by an unregistered and misleading organization that exploited the tragic humanitarian conditions of our people in Gaza, deceived families, collected money from them, and facilitated their travel in an irregular and irresponsible manner. This entity later attempted to disown any responsibility once complications arose. The department will continue to work with the Palestinian embassy and the rest of the South African security cluster to probe these claims. However, even as we do so, we remain steadfast in our commitment to safeguarding the dignity of vulnerable people at all times. So ultimately, this is a situation where they've decided that the care of these unknown individuals trumps that of South Africa's border security. You knew that you don't have any information on their backgrounds. In fact, there was barely even flight information and regular surface level stuff that was available to the South African government. And you kept them on the plane and in these air conditioned buses for a reason. Yet somehow you change your mind when you decide, oh, okay, well, there is accommodation we can put them in and care that's given. But never once did it cross your mind that, hey, maybe we got to send them back. Maybe if we don't know who these people are, they can't tell us where they're going to stay or what their travel plans are. Well, maybe they're not suited to be entering into the country. This is a border security issue. And yeah, unfortunately, Home Affairs and the DA minister failed at this. We then saw how a few days later, the Department of Home Affairs kind of did a U-turn where it withdrew the 90-day visa exemption for, well, as it calls it, the abuse of Palestinian travelers. Following investigations and recommendations by national intelligence structures and consultations conducted with the security cluster, which confirmed the deliberate and ongoing abuse of the 90-day visa exemption by Israeli actors linked to voluntary immigration efforts for residents of the Gaza Strip, the Department of Home Affairs has withdrawn this exemption. Firstly, there's no actual concrete evidence at the time of recording that this was done by Israeli actors. Secondly, to put in quotation marks voluntary immigration is just ridiculous. Most of the people who were interviewed by news stations such as Newsroom Africa after they arrived explained that this was their intention. And in fact, there was one interviewee who said he chose South Africa as the place he wants to live because of the values of the country matching his own. So short stay visa exemptions are commonly used instruments to incentivize tourism. However, investigations into the recent arrival of 2 charter flights transporting Palestinian passport holders revealed systematic abuse of this exemption, with travel designed not for the purposes of tourism or short stays as intended, but to relocate Palestinians from Gaza. Interesting how you guys did a U-turn from your previous statement saying, oh no, it seems like they were all right and we could stick them in accommodation and give them care. So let's let them off the plane because clearly they're all right. But now you're backtracking on that and saying, actually, they weren't here for tourism at all, but rather to be relocated. Funny how you said at the time that there was no sign that they'd be seeking asylum, but now it sounds like your language has changed. So moving on, rather than using ordinary commercial flights, entire airplanes were chartered not by the travelers themselves, but by intermediaries. Most travelers were given one-way tickets to South Africa and prohibited from bringing luggage, while only being allowed to carry US dollars and essentials. Furthermore, it was discovered that many of them lacked departure verification and accommodation in South Africa, as explained, in addition to not possessing return or onward flight tickets. So why did you let them off the plane? Taken together, this constituted obvious abuse of the exemption by external factors for purposes other than its intended use. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but my God, this is actually ridiculous. It's not actually a laughing matter because this compromises national security, but it's laughable to imagine that this can actually go on. So if we scroll down a little bit further, We see Leon Schreiber's public statement on the matter explaining, when the most recent charter flight landed at OR Tambo International Airport, President Cyril Ramaphosa indicated that the travelers may have been flushed out of Gaza. Subsequent investigations have confirmed this to be the case. Withdrawing the visa exemption is the most effective way to prevent further flights of this nature, while ensuring that bona fide travelers from Palestine are safely able to visit South Africa without being subjected to abuse. South Africa will not be complicit in any scheme to exploit or displace Palestinians from Gaza. 2 points I have to make on this. The first one is that, ironically, withdrawing this visa exemption is actually a good thing, and Schreiber is actually tightening up border security, because at least that adds a layer of security and background checks before the people can simply hop on a flight and come to South Africa. So that is actually a good thing that he did, inadvertently, probably without his own realization. But the second thing I want to point out here is that it seems that in his mind, the only thing that matters is the security of these poor Palestinian travelers and whining about Israelis. It's not really anything to do with border security at all. And again, as I mentioned, there were quite a lot of conflicting comments being made here, and it seems that Home Affairs is really in disarray. But unfortunately, the DEA as a party have actually shown that they really do have this sort of Western European mindset of relentless sympathy. And we can see this in the following post. So Helen Ziller recently replied to a pretty viral post on X, and her response went pretty viral as well. So as it explains here, in your opinion, what has ruined Britain? And in response, Helen Ziller writes, Brexit. Now, this is a very peculiar response to have, because for many British people, the Pakistani grooming gangs are a massive issue. Acid attacks and knife attacks are rampant. Islamism is rampant. And I recently just had an interview with Lubna Zaidi. You can check out that interview on my channel. And she is a British citizen of Pakistani Muslim background. And she herself speaks about how radicalism is a huge threat to the UK, a huge threat to society. And yet, for whatever reason, Helen Ziller, as much as I like her, as much as I respect her, refuses to acknowledge this. And the rest of the DA have followed suit. And unfortunately, their perpetual defense of foreigners and foreign interests continues with the next thing that I'm about to show you. So here we had a press release from 2025 explaining how DA calls for urgent public order police to stop Operation Dudula's xenophobic presence at health facilities. Just to give a little bit of a background, Operation Dudula is very anti-illegal immigration, and they decided to prevent foreign nationals from accessing healthcare in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And so in response to this, the DA decided to condemn them, and it explains here that we call on the provincial departments of health and SAPS to ensure that all individuals seeking healthcare are protected from xenophobic attacks and intimidation allegedly perpetrated by members of these organizations. We have also submitted parliamentary questions to determine what extent the Department of Health is failing to protect patients from exercising this vital constitutional right. Section 27 of the Constitution guarantees each and every individual's right to access healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare and emergency medical treatment. The Constitution does not exclude individuals from this human right based on their nationality or country of origin. Here we see the DA get quite aggressive, saying instead of blaming foreign nationals, Operation Dudula and their xenophobic cronies, very subjective language, would do better by holding failing government officials to account rather than intimidating the most vulnerable. So here, yet again, the DA refuses to acknowledge the problem. They take the side of foreign nationals against South Africans. And I understand that Dudula is a controversial organization. And of course, some of the foreign nationals could be legal in South Africa. And I'm not supporting what Dudula is doing. All that I'm simply saying is that the DA seems to be relentless in ignoring the problem and always choosing the side of the Islamists or the foreigners or the asylum seekers or refugees without taking into consideration the impact on South Africans. And I really need to bring this out because unfortunately, yes, I know a lot of DA supporters are going to hit back at me in the comment section, but I really can't be bothered about that because the reality is that this is an important subject. And unfortunately, the DA is the only party ideologically who is sound and who has enough support in parliament in order to combat this. We know that the ANC is aligned with the Islamic regime in Iran and its allies. That's 40% of the vote. That's already gone that way. EFF and MK are no different. Combined, they were about 63% of the vote in the 2024 election. Other than them, the DA is the other big party. They're the party that could at least act as a barrier to this sort of issue, especially since they are in charge of border security through Home Affairs, but they are also failing in this regard. In fact, if we take a look at who the parties are that do actually acknowledge the actual problem and do not have this weird Western European mindset of the DA, it's really just the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus, and the Patriotic Alliance. And combined, they had about 4.5% in the last election, which really isn't enough. And so my final message to the DA and to other people is this. I don't talk about my personal life very much, but I'll say this. I'm of a Middle Eastern extraction. I have many contacts in the Middle East. I know the region very well. I've been to the region. I've seen what it's about. I understand the culture. Middle Easterners and other migrants do not have the mentality of South Africans and Westerners. They are different. You think you understand these people, but you do not. It is crucial that you get this into your mind and change course. Fortunately, due to the mismanagement of South Africa by the ANC, perhaps a lot of the people might not choose South Africa as their preferred destination, and they would rather go to an Australia, America, UK, due to the higher quality of life. And so maybe, hey, the mismanagement of South Africa might work in its favor. But until a counterforce emerges and breaks this weird sympathy that's being displayed by the DA and others, this is not going to change. South Africa is in danger, and somebody needs to step up and finally take this into consideration and take action. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Also, consider becoming a Power Club member by clicking the join button below. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.